What's up, everybody? Wes Goldberg here, co-host of Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. In case you missed last night's episode, following the Heat's loss to the New York Knicks, we had our episode up after that. Did have some technical difficulties in that one, so we apologize for that. If you're here in Miami, you know that there's been some rainstorms and things like that that interfered with the Wi-Fi. Blah blah blah. You don't want to hear about that. But we're going live right now on the Wes Goldberg YouTube channel. Going to be talking about a few different things, including the NBA MVP race, Jimmy Butler making an appearance. I'll give you my top five in NBA MVP if I had a ballot and submitted it right now. I also want to weigh in on the Dan Le Batard versus Stephen A thing in a little bit. But we're going to start with something that's been talked about a little bit now. I've been seeing a lot on Heat Twitter, whether or not the Miami Heat should change their starting lineup and kind of just overhaul the rotations in general with 5 games left in the season. And so I've seen this argument that, okay, this lineup clearly not working, having added Kevin Love post All-Star break. They're bottom 10 in offense, bottom 10 in defense, bottom 10 in net rating. It's not been good. It's not been great. They've lost 3 straight games. Kevin Love is playing fewer and fewer minutes. He logged 16 minutes last night against the Knicks, which is the fewest amount of minutes that he's logged since becoming a member of the Miami Heat. It's been less than 20 minutes in 3 straight games. So that's not great. But and then there's other things that are concerning, right? The offense just can't score. 100 points, 92 points, and 92 points in the last 3 games, all 3 losses. So, if the offense is not going to pick up, and it looked like it was trending, maybe turning a corner, going in the right direction there, but clearly over the last 3 games, it's not. If the offense is just never going to pick up and be sustainable, then should this team just lean all the way into defense? And that's sort of the argument that's been out there is um, the Heat should just overhaul the starting lineup, overhaul the rotation, and only play its good defenders and just lean all the way into defense because as opposed to before the All-Star break when it was a top 10 unit in defensive rating, the Heat have been one of the worst teams in the league defensively since the All-Star break, since adding Kevin Love. We'll talk about the Kevin Love specifically here in a minute. But here would be the idea of what an all defense team would look like. And I think it's an interesting time to bring this up because this is basically what the New York Knicks did when they turned their whole season around, right? They took guys like Evan Fournier and Derrick Rose out of their rotation, started Quentin Grimes, only played their strong defenders. And because of that, they were able to turn their season around. Tom Thibodeau, guys that he only trusts on the court, all that kind of stuff. So, what if the Heat were to do something similar to the team that, like the team that they just lost to on Wednesday night? So, what would that lineup like? What would an all defensive rotation look like? I think the starting lineup first is you would drop Kevin Love out of that starting lineup, and you would start Gabe Vincent, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin, Bam Adebayo. You're starting Tyler Hero because he's probably, you need him for scoring, you need him for shooting. But if you really wanted to go to the extreme of this spectrum, you could start Gabe Vincent and Kyle Lowry. You could start Gabe Vincent and Victor Oladipo, Kyle Lowry and Victor Oladipo, one of those combinations. But I do think that they would just continue to start Tyler Hero. I get a lot of comments a lot about Tyler Hero doesn't try hard on defense and stuff. I don't know what games you guys are watching if you're commenting. I'm not saying that he's an elite lockdown defender, but to accuse him of not trying hard, I don't think. Look, maybe there's a play here and there, but that's not the case. I watched every Tyler Hero minute this season and for his career, basically. So I'm not. He's having the best defensive career of his season of his career. So I don't know where that's coming from. So I think you would still start him even in an all defense scenario. But then the bench would look like if it's that starting 5: Kyle Lowry, Victor Oladipo, Haywood Highsmith, and Cody Zeller. So who are the guys that are out of the rotation? It would be, like I said, Kevin Love. Max Strus would drop out of the rotation, and so would Duncan Robinson, even though his minutes are pretty few and far between right now. Here's the problem with that. I think it sounds good. I don't know that it would work, right? I have this theory that I think we sometimes overrate how good a player is defensively just because that player might not be very good offensively. Case in point, a guy like Haywood Highsmith. I think Haywood Highsmith is a good defender. I don't think that opposing offensive players are scared to go at Haywood Highsmith. You know what I mean? Like There's a difference of, all right, that's Kawhi Leonard in front of me. That's OG Anunoby in front of me. That's Bam Adebayo in front of me. That's Jimmy Butler in front of me. Like, you don't want that matchup. You're actively trying to switch out of that matchup. Haywood Highsmith is good. I have no problem with Haywood Highsmith. I think he's probably better than most opponents think he is defensively. But also, nobody's scared of Haywood Highsmith. Nobody's looking at Haywood Highsmith and guarding him and saying, "Oh, I gotta get this guy switched off of me." All right, and I would probably say that that's the case. I'm not trying to just pick on Haywood Highsmith. I don't think that that's the case for many Heat defenders. I don't think that there's a lot of like good to great defenders on the Miami Heat. I think you have Bam. I think you have Jimmy. I'd probably put Caleb Martin in that mix, even though he's probably a better team defender than a one-on-one defender, even though he's a pretty good one-on-one defender. And that might be the end of my list. That might be the end of my list of defenders that guys are actively not wanting to go at. Gabe Vincent is a fine defender, but he's only really guarding one position, right? Like, you're not scared of going at Gabe Vincent. If you're Jason Tatum, you're asking for Gabe Vincent on the switch. Matter of fact, you're probably at this point in his career doing the same thing to Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero ditto. Victor Oladipo's all right. He's more of like, I'll steal the ball from you every once in a while, but as a team defender, I think he's kind of one of those like Patrick Beverly guys that just does a lot without really doing anything. They're just kind of like always moving, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're always in the right place. I think Victor Oladipo's okay defensively. He'd probably be involved in this rotation that we're talking about here if you're going all defense. But in terms of guys that you're really scared of to go against, I think it's Jimmy Butler. I think it's Bam Adebayo. That's it. And then in terms of like high end defenders, I think you throw Caleb Martin in there, and that's probably it for the Heat. So then you're basically asking 4 or 5 other guys to pick up the slack in that rotation and be kind of all world defenders and kind of form this all defense group and turn this Miami Heat defense back into a top 10 unit. Now, you might be sitting there and saying, well, Wes, they were already a top 10 unit before they added Kevin Love into the starting lineup. So why wouldn't you just go back to that? I think the defense was propped up on some fake, you know, smoke and mirrors stuff for a lot of the season. I think that's part of the reason why Eric Spoelstra decided to make that change is he knew that this wasn't really a top 10 unit defensively. Like last year, they got away with drawing a lot of charges. That's how their rim contest numbers weren't great because they weren't big, but they drew a lot of charges and they created a lot of turnovers that way. This year, they created turnovers in a more traditional way, jumping passing lanes, jamming up those passing lanes, getting out in on the break and in transition. And they did that, and it stopped possessions, right? It stopped opponent possessions, but it's also not sustainable, right? To be relying on turnovers every single night. At the end of the day, you kind of need size. You need to put guys in front of your opponent, in front of opposing ball handlers, between the opposing ball handler and the basket. And in order to do that, the Heat wanted to increase their size. They want to move Caleb Martin to the bench, blah, blah, blah. We know all these things, change up their defensive scheme. So I think the defense was propped up for a lot of the season. So I don't think that it's just as simple as, all right, just go back to the old starting lineup, go back to the old rotation, and then all of a sudden this will be a top 10 unit again. I don't think that that's true. All right. So given all of this, I think that the idea of going, all right, let's lean all the way into defense sounds good, but I don't think it's realistic. And I don't think that it could be as achievable as what, say, the Knicks did mid-year to change their season. I don't think it's that simple. What if they went the other way? What if they went the other way and they leaned all offense? All right. If we assume maybe the best version of this defense is playing fast paced, jumping passing lanes, you're not really going to stop people from getting to the basket a whole lot, but maybe you could force those turnovers. Maybe you could play fast. Maybe you could play in the open floor a little bit more, and that feeds your offense. Well, what if they leaned all the way into the offensive side of the ball and said, you know what? Since we've kind of given up on the whole defensive thing anyway this year, what if we just started, for instance, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, our two best shooters, put them in the backcourt. Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin for the fast pace, the speed, and the shooting there at the 4 from Caleb, and then obviously Bam at center. What if you went that way? We're seeing it work for the Sacramento Kings. They have a bottom 5 defense, but they have one of the best records in the NBA. Now, again, it's one of those things that theoretically sounds good, but in practice, I don't know that the Heat have the talent to pull it off, right? Because as great as Bam is as a facilitator, and as good as Tyler Hero has been and developed as a playmaker, I still think that, when you're outside of those two guys, and obviously Jimmy Butler, I don't know that there's a whole lot of offensive talent here to speak of. They don't have the shooting the way that Sacramento does, right? Duncan Robinson, he had a good first half. He had a good game, specifically in the first half against the Knicks the other night. Maybe if you were to do this, maybe there's something sustainable there. You do just have to live with the defensive lapses and the fouls, but that's what Kevin Herter does for the Sacramento Kings, but he makes shots and they leave him out there. Kyle Lowry's obviously fallen off. Victor Oladipo can't make a shot. Haywood Highsmith is not a reliable shooter. He's very streaky. Max Strus, I don't know what happened to his shot this year. Even Kevin Love, who's supposed to be sort of your savior from three-point range, has been shooting less than 30% since joining the Heat. So you might have some guys here, if it's just Tyler, Jimmy, Bam, and Duncan, maybe even. But that's it in terms of like elite offensive talent. Not even elite. Elite's a strong word, but just above average to very good offensive talent. The other part of it, too, is that if you're running things through Jimmy Butler, you're going to play slower. And so that he just naturally slows down the game. And I was watching that and I tweeted out this clip Wednesday night during the Knicks game, the Heat running this double drag screen to get Gabe Vincent an open shot from the corner. And I really liked the action, but what also really stuck out to me was, man, they just move through these sets so slowly. It's like Jimmy Butler is just jogging through them. And it's not jogging, it's not laziness. It's just him kind of methodically prodding the defense and kind of finding openings. So I get it, but that's just his speed. So as long as Jimmy Butler's on your team, you're never really going to play at a fast pace. So now again, if you were to go, all right, the all defensive thing's not going to work. What if we did all offense and we can just get good at that? Theoretically, this kind of lineup in this rotation sounds good, but in practice, I'm not sure that it works, even though maybe it would. But I would say probably it doesn't, because you don't have the shooting that would in turn create the spacing that Jimmy Butler would need. And if you're not getting the spacing, then you need the pace, and you're not really getting the pace with this group either. And so I understand the idea overall of, all right, your bottom 10 in offense, your bottom 10 in defense. Can you just lift one of these into an above average unit? And my answer right now would probably be, I don't think that the Heat have a very good shot at doing either of those things. I think that this team is tired. I think this team is broken down. And I also think that there's only 5 games left in this season. And to make a wholesale change like that is grasping for straws. Now, I'm not saying it would not happen. I'm not saying it wouldn't happen. But let's say that you even do this. 5 games left in the year. You turn things around a little bit. And I will take questions in the live chat if you're in here and you want to ask questions. But with just 5 games left, I mean, you're grasping at straws if you make these changes. And what are you even doing? Like, what are you even doing it for? To try to get the number 6 seed? All right, sure. Yeah. And then what? And then what? Because this team's simply not good enough. And you can make all these changes for all these players. We're not going to be back here next season. So there's that. Let's move on to the MVP conversation, because ESPN released their straw poll. They do, what is this, quarterly now, where they poll a bunch of MVP voters and media guys and media types and ask, okay, if you had a ballot right now, how would you break down MVP? Who would you vote for? So Nikola Jokic was the runaway guy the last time they did this. Now this new one released Thursday afternoon. They have Joel Embiid at number 1. Just 2 points, 2 total points over Nikola Jokic, which makes sense. I have no problem with it. I have no problem with voters changing their minds. There's new information coming in literally every day in the NBA. So, things change. Joel Embiid's been awesome lately. What, player of the month 2 months in a row? He could be player of the month in March when it's all said and done. Nikola Jokic has been fine. Denver had that little slump there, so he drops back. And then Giannis is going to be your number 3. Here's what I really want to talk about, because to me, I think with another week and a half left in the regular season, it's still anybody's race between Embiid, Jokic, and I would throw Giannis in there. I still think that he could potentially win this, depending on how this next week and a half and these next few games go. But it's going to be those 3 in some kind of order. And right now, that's not all that interesting to me to debate that, because I'd rather just wait and see how all this turns out. What's interesting to me is how Luka Doncic, and Jason Tatum are still the last 2 guys on everybody's ballot, it seems. Jason Tatum, number 4, got 90 fourth place votes, 5 fifth place votes. Luka Doncic, 2 fourth place votes, 31 fifth place votes. Not as many top 5 votes as Luka got the last time they did this, as Dallas slides. Right now, they're out of the play-in tournament altogether. But I'm surprised he's even still at 5. I'm honestly surprised he's still even at 5, and I could tell you why he's at 5 is it's by default because voters aren't thinking strong enough. I think so much of the conversation about MVP this year has been about Embiid versus Jokic, right? And then Giannis kind of over here a little bit. We really haven't talked about Tatum and Luka. And for the longest time, we've all just sort of assumed, okay, it's Embiid and Jokic, maybe Giannis in that top tier, or maybe just a tier below them by himself. And then we've kind of also in sort of this discourse elevated Tatum and Luka into that 4 or 5 tier by themselves. And we've kind of assumed that those are going to be the top 5 guys, especially when Steph Curry missed all that time. And what I would say to you is that Luka has no business being in the top 5 of any MVP ballots right now. I'm sorry, man. Like, you can't be on the MVP if your team doesn't make the play-in tournament. I'm not even talking about the playoffs. The play-in tournament. The play-in tournament. And even if the Mavericks do make the play-in tournament, they have given me no reason to think that they deserve to have an MVP on their roster this year. And Luka's not going to win MVP. That's not what I'm saying. But even a top 5 guy. And I think the top 5 in any given year matters, right? Like, the ballots go out with 5 slots on them. These voters get to choose 5 guys. They get to vote for 5 different players. And that record is kept. And historically, you can look back on the top 5 vote getters for MVP every single year and get a pretty good snapshot of the 5 most dominant players or 5 most important players every single season. I'm not saying Luka has not been dominant, but his team has not been good at all. Defensively, Luka's been a disaster on defense, borderline embarrassing. It's the worst defense I've ever seen Luka play. As much crap as Kyrie Irving gets for playing for kind of whiffing on defense and not caring, like Luka's been way worse since Kyrie got to Dallas, way worse. And so I made the argument on Locked On Heat a few days ago that Jimmy Butler should at least be in the conversation for a top 5 ballot placement. Now, since we had that argument, Jimmy Butler finished 9th in the MVP Straw Bowl. So maybe somebody was listening. I don't know. He got 1 5th place vote and 1 4th place vote. This is not me arguing on behalf of Jimmy Butler. This is me arguing against Luka and even really Tatum just being penciled even though I do think that the beginning of the year matters as much as the end of the year. It's a regular season award. So if Tatum, his stats are still great and the Celtics are still awesome. And so it's okay if you want to put him in your top 5. I really don't even have a problem him being at 4, but I'm seeing guys like SGA from OKC. That's fine. But it's another playing team. Like, it's the Thunder. I don't know, man. It just doesn't feel right to have a Thunder player in MVP. Shea's been awesome. He's going to be first. He's probably going to be first team All NBA this year. Definitely on the All NBA team, but has a real argument to be first team. But it just OKC does not scream to me a team that should have an MVP. I'm looking at the top teams in the league who are and the players that are leading those teams. Donovan Mitchell is there. You can make a strong case that Donovan Mitchell should be on a ballot, but I don't know that he's the best player on his own team. Like, Evan Mobley's been great for them this year. Donovan Mitchell is the best player on the Cavs, but like, I don't know, between Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen, Darius Garland, like there's a lot of talent there. I don't know that Donovan Mitchell has been head over heels better than all of those teammates. Stephen Curry's missed too many games. Devin Booker's missed too many games. John Morant, that whole situation. I mean, if he has if he goes off the next week and a half, I wouldn't rule out putting him on my top 5. But with everything going on right now, I don't think you could put him in your top 5. Not yet. Here's the guy that's not getting enough attention. And I think should probably be a shoo-in for a top 5 placement on the ballot. And that's Domantas Sabonis. There is no doubt he's been the most important Sacramento King. And De'Aaron Fox has been awesome, and his clutch stats are great. But Domantas Sabonis, how he has transformed that team from when they got him to now, and how everything runs through him on offense, and what he's done to change not just what they do offensively, but the mindset of that team, right? That tough physical mindset. I don't think that there's any doubt that he's one of the top 5. And by the way, the Sacramento Kings are awesome. And they just clinched their first playoff berth in 16 years. They're going to be a top 3 seed in the Western Conference. They win a lot of games. Their offense is one of the best offenses ever. They're the best offense in the NBA this year by a mile. That's Domantas Sabonis. That doesn't happen without Sabonis. I think there's one other player in the league that you could put in Sabonis' spot in the Sacramento Kings and have a similar kind of outcome, and that's Nikola Jokic. And I love De'Aaron Fox. But you could probably put 7 or 8 other guards in De'Aaron Fox's place, maybe even more. probably a dozen guards in De'Aaron Fox's place. Give them some time to work out the chemistry that him and Sabonis worked out, and get a very similar result, if not the same one, or maybe even better, depending on the guard that you put in there. But Sabonis is one of a kind, and I think he deserves some real credit here for what has happened in Sacramento. And if you're asking me if it's Luka Doncic with a team that's not even in the play-in tournament, putting up great stats, but a team that's not even in the play-in right now, versus Sabonis, who's also putting up incredible stats. Not the raw scoring numbers that Luka is doing, but between the assists, the rebounding, and is winning games for a team that really matters. There is no doubt in my mind Sabonis should be a top 5. Like, that is a lock for me at this point. Tatum is even a little bit more flimsy than Sabonis at this point. But if you were to ask me, if you were to hand me a ballot right now, here's my top 5. I'd probably go in this order: Embiid, Jokic, Giannis, Sabonis, and then Tatum. That would probably be my top 5. All right, let's move on then to the Stephen A. Smith versus Dan Le Batard debate. I weighed in on this on Twitter, but for those who didn't catch it, I'll weigh in here. This whole thing was really interesting to me. For those who missed it, Le Batard brought Stephen A. on to his show and then basically told Stephen A. that he hated what he has done to the sports media discourse, the way that we talk about sports. And by doing that, Dan was obviously referring to First Take, Stephen A., performative, loud, hot takes all the time about every which subject and all these things. And Stephen A. got upset and he said, "What about you, Dan? What about you? Like, what is it that you do differently than what I do?" And they both went back and forth. They both started from newspapers, came up and made decent livings in newspapers, made a name for themselves, but made their money and fame on radio and on TV. And so that's what Stephen A. was pointing out in regards to Dan. And Stephen A. then went on his own podcast and basically doubled down on all those things and said that he isn't the first one to come out with the hot takes, that it's been going on long before him, and he's just basically the best at it, which he is. He is the best at it, at that performance of hot taking. Here's my point: is I don't love the discourse that came in after that. I think people are trying to pick sides and all these things. My overall take is that I also think that it showed a little bit of lack of self-awareness on Dan's part, if I'm being quite honest. It's not Stephen A.'s fault that he's that he's inspired, I should say, impersonators, copycats. That's not Stephen A.'s fault. Just like it's not Dan's fault that he's inspired copycats and impersonators. And I would say that the copycats of Dan, the impersonators of Dan Le Batard and what that whole crew is doing, are just as bad for the sports discourse as the Stephen A. impersonators. And that's not to blame Dan, and that's not to blame Stephen A. When you are at the height of your field and when you're at the best of what you do, you are going to inspire copycats and impersonators. You're just going to do it. It's always going to happen. But I don't think that the impersonators of the Dan Le Batard show are good for the discourse either. Because here's the thing. Here's what the difference between Stephen A. and Dan Le Batard are two sides of the same coin. All right. They're both performative. And that's not an insult. It's not a critique. It's just what sports media is. If you're on a radio show or on a podcast and just being yourself, I don't want to listen to you. I want to listen to you have a take. I want to listen to you have an opinion. I want to listen to a performance. I want to watch something that is of an entertainment value, right? I don't watch Leonardo DiCaprio go to the bathroom, right? I want to watch Leonardo DiCaprio portray a character, right? It's not an exact metaphor. Okay, I understand that. But at the end of the day, this is an entertainment product, and it ought to be some level, a smidge of a percentage, at the very least, a performance. And so the thing that Dan does and his group does that's so hard is they bring you in and really make you want to be a part of a community. They make you want to know more about them. And they do that by doing the babbling thing, the rambling thing, the sort of inside joke stuff that a lot of podcasts and a lot of shows and a lot of content creators are trying to do now because they've heard it and seen it and liked it from Dan Le Batard and Stu Gatz in that group. So I can't tell you how many times I listen to a podcast. I'll turn it on. The first 5 minutes is, "How's your commute? Oh, I ate this thing. Oh my God, I saw this movie," and just sort of joking and making fun of the entire thing. And I can't tell you an easier way to get me to tune out of a podcast earlier because that stuff is really hard. And I know Dan and Stugotz, they make it look easy. And it's not for everybody, but people love it also. People love it. People love it because they get to know the characters, they get to know the people on the show, and they get invested in those characters, they get invested in their lives, and they want to tune in again to get updates and see how they're doing. And that creates a community. And that's really hard in today's day and age. This work from home, Zoom era, that's very, very difficult. And they do a masterful job of it. And they have done it for a long time. And they've earned it. They've earned it. But you can't replicate it because then it becomes inauthentic. And I I'm sorry, I just don't care about a lot of podcasters' lives. And I think when you get to a high level and you're trying to do this at a high level, it's probably required to bring in your listening, your listeners, your fans, your audience into your life. It is. It's a requirement in today's age to bring, but the first 10 minutes of your show also can't be about what you did over the weekend. Right. And that's the thing about Stephen A that is so great is, man, he gets to the point, doesn't he? He gets to the point really quick, as good as anybody does. Within 30 seconds, you know exactly where Stephen A stands on any given topic. And I would say in a world that's moving faster and faster and there's more and more content coming at us, that's actually a generous thing that Stephen A does for his audience is, hey, you got as prolific as Stephen A is, do you consume everything that Stephen A puts out? Absolutely not. No way. That's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. So he probably says this multiple things on multiple says the same thing multiple times on multiple platforms. But the beauty of it is that he's going to give it to you quickly and he's going to give it to you fast and you're going to know exactly where he stands. And I would actually argue that a lot of up and coming people should do more of that and do less of the Dan Le Batard thing because I think the Le Batard thing requires a track record and time and chemistry. And that stuff you can't just make up. You can't just figure that out. So I think both of these guys have been good for the industry. I think both of them have been bad for the industry in some respects. Not their fault, not attacking them at all. But my overall takeaway is, look, you're not going to be as good as Stephen A. Or I shouldn't even say as good. That's not even fair. You're not going to be Stephen A. You're not going to be performative in the hot takey way that he is, right? That is uniquely Stephen A. Smith. And actually, I do think it's authentic. Having seen Stephen A. off of TV, off of radio, that's just kind of how he is about everything. It's pretty authentic. Okay. I'm not saying that it's not performative when he's on camera. He's definitely playing a character, doing a bit, getting to his points quickly. But it is him. It's what he wants to do on air. It's what he naturally is inclined to do on air. Where with the Le Batard show and that whole group, that is what they are naturally inclined to do when they are on air. If they were to try out and come on and do the Stephen A thing, they would be bad at it. Nobody would listen to it. Stephen A wanted to do the Le Batard thing. He would be bad at it. Nobody would want to listen to it. But if you're out there as a content creator and just trying to make something, I would argue, listen to Dan and don't follow Stephen A. Smith's lead because that would be bad for the sports media discourse. But I would also urge you, don't follow Dan Le Batard and don't try to do what he's doing either because that would also be bad for the sports media discourse. Those, they are two sides of the same sports media spectrum. One takes sports way too seriously, and the one probably doesn't take sports seriously enough. But there's a lot of great content happening in the middle of that spectrum. And I would just listen to you and just be yourself when you're creating content. Where do you fall on that spectrum? You'll find out. But whatever you're inclined to do when you're creating content, I would just listen to that and don't try to be anybody else. Just try to do good work. All right, that'll do it for me today here on the Wes Goldberg YouTube channel. Look, we appreciate everybody that subscribes to Locked On Heat and can find my content over there with my co-host David Ramil. We'll have more content on Locked On Heat on that channel tomorrow morning, Friday morning. But if you've not yet subscribed and liked this channel, the Wes Goldberg YouTube channel, please do hit that subscribe button. This is brand new this week. We're trying to build it up. We're kind of experimenting with new things here. So I'd really appreciate your support. Please hit that subscribe button as I build this thing. It's not going to just be Heat takes. I want Miami Heat takes. I want NBA stuff. I'm going to bring you NFL stuff. I've got a few Miami Dolphins videos already up. As you could see, I'm wearing my Miami Marlins hat. It's actually a Florida Marlins hat. The Marlins are wearing the teal Florida Marlin throwbacks on opening day. In a couple of hours, that game starts. I'm going to try to give you my opening day thoughts either tomorrow, over the weekend, or early next week after we get some games under our belt, maybe. I got sports media takes. I'm going to a Taylor Swift concert later in April. I'll give you those takes too. I just want to interact more with you, the audience, and branch out beyond what it is that I'm doing over at Locked On Heat. So again, please do subscribe. It would mean the world to me. Thanks for listening for now.